Welcome to Mindful AI, the podcast where we explore how to create AI that is beneficial to humanity, ethical, and promotes human values and flourishing. In today's episode, we sit down with Oliver Edholm, a trailblazing AI entrepreneur who founded a multi-million-dollar AI company at just 19. We explore his remarkable journey from coding as a kid to tackling burnout and dive into the rapid evolution of AI, its risks, and its potential to transform humanity. Oliver also shares his thoughts on consciousness, ethics, and how AI might one day help us unlock deeper understandings of what it means to be human. It's a thought-provoking discussion you won't want to miss. If you find this episode insightful, please subscribe to Mindful AI and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us bring more of these important and meaningful conversations to you and others. Here we go. So welcome to Oliver Edholm. In Swedish, I guess it's Oliver Edholm, but no one would understand what I'm saying if I pronounced your name that way. Yeah, it's really exciting to have you here. And for me, it's extra interesting because I've known Oliver since I've known you your entire life, actually. Because I'm good friends with your parents, so I've kind of seen you grow up. And I just to kick us off, I remember, and I think we'll probably get into your background and what brought you to where you are today. But I was remembering this little anecdote from when you were maybe 12 or 13. So your parents told me that you got this really terrible grade in high school, and the subject was called technology. I think, and so you're supposed to build something out of cardboard, something like that, and you did a lousy job at it, so you got this really poor grade. And this was at the same time as you had programmed your own app, published it in the app stores, and monetized it. So I remember thinking that this poor technology grade really didn't reflect the reality of your capacity at the time. And I know that you struggled with the Swedish school system. And actually my friends, your parents, they at times they would come to me and my wife and ask worried questions in our roles as psychologists, and all of us really struggling. What should we do? And I think our advice was pretty much he'll sort himself out. He's just in a place where he's not being seen and heard and challenged. So that was a little anecdote from my perspective of seeing you grow up.
It's I feel touched hearing that, and it's a bit funny and bizarre that we're doing this podcast.
Oh, bro.
It makes a lot of sense. Also, we have a lot of common interests, and I'm excited to dive in. So it's really yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to just to start us off? I know your story has been told by yourself in your TED Talk and in many of the interviews you've done, but do you just want to summarize a little bit of what brought you to where you are today and your relationship to AI and the AI revolution, so to speak?
Yeah. So as you said, Martin, I got quite interested in programming at a young age. It started with Minecraft, I would say. I played a lot of Minecraft. I got bored of Minecraft, but you can change the code behind the game. And that's how I got into programming, really. And then Minecraft is written in Java, which is also the language you make Android apps in. So through that, I made a smartphone app, and I got quite obsessed really about building stuff. And as you also said, I had quite a hard time in the Swedish school system, and mentioned all sorts of reasons for that. Um, I don't think it's just the school system, but it also helped me, I would say, because it really forced me to um, take my own path quite early on. So yeah, even in like eighth grade, I knew that normal school wouldn't work. I needed to find my own path, and I started reading books about AI and automation. And I picked up this book called Superintelligence by this philosopher called Ostrom. And me seeking kind of a meaning in life, so to say, and um, an alternative path. uh, I found that I found it quite compelling that we are on a path where, with more and more access to computing power and better and better algorithms, we can create artificial intelligence. And at some point, this intelligence will be so smart that it can do AI research much better than humans, right? And then when you have AI that's super fast at doing AI research itself, then you might reach this intelligence explosion where you can really solve anything. You can solve climate change, you can find treatments to cancer. But as this book also laid out, there's all these risks with it as well. Very large risks, in my opinion. So this was my religion, you could say, at a young age. And that made me take quite drastic actions. I booked a flight ticket without my parents knowing to Singapore at 16.
And imagine that this was one of the instances where your parents called us and there was slight panic in their voice and said, Oliver's gone by, he just took off and went to Singapore. What should we do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can imagine that was quite an interesting call. And yeah, I was on a mission, let's put it like that. And I got a research assistant job in Singapore, at the National University of Singapore when I was 17. And that was quite an interesting experience. But quite soon after, I decided that I want to start a company instead. So I went back to Sweden and started this company called Depict.ai, where we did AI recommendation engines for e-commerce. And we started this right around COVID. So it took off quite quickly. And 2 days after I had turned 19, I had raised over $20 million in funding for this company. And a little bit more than a year later, I burnt out. And we were 40 employees. I guess it was 20. And I had to revive myself and the company, you could say, because COVID was starting to decrease and e-commerce was going through a change. And through that, I really, really deepened my relationship to meditation. It's a very broad term, and a lot of kind of inner practices. And now I'm on a sabbatical. The company's still running, but I'm quite interested in where the AI development is happening, talking in media a bit in Sweden about the AI development. And I'm extra interested in how this ties into consciousness and her understandings of consciousness. So, yeah, that's a little bit longer story, but it gives me context.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you seem to. I mean, the first thing you explored was AI, and there seemed to have been something that really drew you to the vision and the potential of how impactful that could be for humanity. And then now you seem to be on more of an inner exploration of what is consciousness. And also, I found it interesting. I listened to an interview, unfortunately in Swedish, so it won't be accessible to many of our listeners. But in that interview, you mentioned that um, you believe that the causes for real happiness and contentment doesn't come from the external world, the gadgets that we can accumulate, but rather it comes from inner causes and development of those. I'm really fascinated to hear what's your take on how that intersects with AI. How can AI help us in that kind of exploration and development moving forward?
Yeah, it's a very complex question, I would say, because you can look at it from many angles, and you can look at it from many different stages of the AI development. When we talk about AI, we're really talking about technology. Like, what can technology do for us? And as I view it, AI is really just a accelerator of technology. It accelerates technological development. So I think that really keeps the conversation more grounded and less abstract, because we all have our own relationships with technology. We have technologies that help us, and we have technologies that absolutely doesn't help us. And then there are gray zone technologies where it really depends on how you use it, right? Almost all of us have a smartphone, and do you blame your smartphone for the behaviors you use on a smartphone? I don't know. It maybe propels our certain patterns are more easily triggered, but do you blame the technology? It's hard to say, and that's where you come back again to does happiness come externally or internally? I think at the end of the day, if you look at it from a modern scientific perspective, we are uh, the way science looks at humans right now, we're a piece of meat that have a certain biological patterns, and depending on what these root biological patterns, some would say maybe your behaviors are quite driven by kind of emotional conditioning, for instance. So if you have emotional conditioning to want to avoid certain emotions, then that will reflect many layers in the external. Uh, or if you have conditioning for, you have an uncontrollable sex drive, let's say, and this ties into the AI development, because now you have essentially AI that's creating very realistic porn videos, for instance, and you have technologies like,
And people are already falling in love with their AI girlfriends and
so to keep it short, I would like to keep it at the more grounded terminology of artificial intelligence is an accelerator of technology, and depending on how smart this artificial intelligence is, uh, you will get uh, more and more powerful technology.
Could it then potentially at some point be useful for us to explore some of those more valuable human qualities and virtues and those kind of things? Do you think AI has a role there, or will it just distract us and mess us up like our smartphones did?
Yeah, I think that's the question, I would say. And I'm noticing I'm slowing down a bit because there's so many branches I can go on here. But I would like to say that if you take from a more societal perspective, what is happening with this AI development, you have this trend called scaling law, where you have this kind of law that very few people know about, but it's actually the core driver behind the fast growth and capabilities of ChatGPT, for instance. So I think this is very important to state. It's OpenAI, the founders of ChatGPT. They released this research article called Neural Scaling Laws in 2020. And what they essentially discovered or really clarified in this research article is that if you use this fundamental architecture, or you could say a Lego building block called a transformer, you could say it's essentially it's a Lego block. And if you stack these Lego blocks next to each other in a certain pattern, then you can actually scale these Lego blocks to massive extents. So you can have huge architectures of transformers where essentially the more data and compute power essentially ships in data centers you put into this model, the more capable the model gets, the smarter it gets, the more capable ChatGPT-like models we get. And there seems to be the case that there's no diminishing returns so far. So the more compute, the more data you throw in, the smarter the models get. And we don't see any sign of this slowing down. So this is very nice for big tech companies because they have billions and billions of dollars. They don't know what to do with. And what they're doing is they're scaling up huge data centers right now to train these models. And it's quite remarkable that we don't see any diminished returns of this. So it's almost like we figured out the fundamental formula for intelligence right now. So it's not that we necessarily need smarter algorithms as it looks right now for this kind of intelligence. The more computer power and the more data we throw in, the more capable. Yeah. So you have this scaling law, and you ask the question of whether we can use AI for essentially human flourishment. That's how I understood it.
Yeah.
And the reason I wanted to mention the scaling laws is because you can quite predictably forecast that we will get smarter and smarter AI the coming future. So from that perspective, we should prepare ourselves. We should prepare ourselves. This is not woo-woo sci-fi stuff. This is happening. And if you look at the top AI labs of the world, the CEOs of these AI labs, they are essentially saying that they think if they would have to guess, we will have artificial general intelligence. So essentially AI that's as capable as average humans in almost every economically valuable task by 2030. So this is happening, and I would definitely encourage people to look up the scaling law trend, because there's billions and billions and billions of dollars invested in this, because this actually works. And if you look at where we are in the public discourse, there's no mention of these scaling laws. And if you look on a policy level, there's very little preparedness for these capability increases. One example is that OpenAI released this ChatGPT 01 model roughly 50 days ago, as per this recording. September 12th, they released it. And this O1 model is as good as graduate/PhD students in physics, chemistry, and biology. And so they kind of made a test to assess how capable this model was. And it was as capable on quite complex questions as physics, chemistry, and biology student. And if you ask this uncensored version of this model questions around how to make bioweapons, so essentially engineered pandemics and so forth, you got PhD level answers and very specific answers on if I extrapolate or what kind, because there are a lot of, we for instance have CRISPR, this ability to do gene editing, that
The gene slicing.
that also the price of gene slicing is exponentially cheaper for every year as well. So there are pandemics you can actually engineer quite easily to kill millions of people, and I don't like scaring people, but this is the truth, so I'm gonna say this. For every increase of capability, for every frontier model that, let's say, OpenAI releases, a few months later, roughly 6 months later, there is a roughly as capable open source model coming out. So that means that the source code, the weights are publicly available to anyone. And when these open source models are released, a few days after, every time, there has been an uncensored version released, because you can easily just retrain it to remove all the safety hooks, essentially. And then there are places you can get these models, and you can get pretty explicit, dangerous replies from these models. So when you democratize access to good technology, that's great, right? But if you democratize access to dangerous technologies, I played a lot of Minecraft, right, when I was younger, and I learned it's way easier to destroy something than build something. It's easier to destroy than build. So we need preparedness around a lot of practical things, like bioweapons. And we need preparedness in terms of cybersecurity and so forth. And because the ease of access to very dangerous technologies will just increase.
Mm.
And yeah,
Can I jump in, Martin? Thank you.
Yeah, I've monopolized the conversation, of course, of please do.
So thanks so much, Oliver, for being so, open, transparent, and speaking up, your thoughts and sharing your very sincere, genuine concerns. When I was doing my research in preparation for this conversation, because differently than Martin, I didn't see you growing. I'm new to you, so I did a little bit of my homework. So watch your TED Talk and watch anything that I could watch, see on available. And I was moved when I read that you came across Nick Bostrom book, Superintelligence, because in my 40s, I started reading and I got bored after a while. It was like too hard. And seeing that you came across that book and you read, and had such an impact to you, I thought like, wow, there's something about this young man. And then what came to mind, a number of things, and I'll probably will ramble a little bit, so hopefully it will make sense where I'm going with this. But one book that I actually read in full, and in addition to a little bit of research that I did back in 2020 when I wrote the Mindful AI Manifesto, which was a very, ordinary article that I published on LinkedIn, was Life 3.0 from Mark Stegmark. And I remember Andy Smith, actually, for Accenture, he recommended that book to me. And when I read, was interesting because I felt that Marx had a very balanced view on, the pessimist view. Let's start with the optimist view of the impact of AI to humanity, like the golden age where we have AI solving our, big problems and helping us to enjoy a more fulfilling and meaningful life, humans in general. And so that's the optimistic potential scenario. And then we had the more pessimistic, which is doesn't actually look great. And he was saying, I guess the message I remember from Mark Segmark was, there's still time. We still have time, but we need to do some work. And you mentioned policies, regulation. What actually triggered my interest before 2020, before I wrote the Mindful AI Manifesto article on LinkedIn, was a TED Talk. Actually, I tried to find the TED Talk later. I couldn't find, but there was this TED Talk from a AI researcher that he ended the TED Talk saying, we are making very rapid progress. This was 2018, I think, very rapid progress with AI, but we are not making progress with governance and legislation around AI. And that was a main concern for him back then. So that really kind of caught my attention. So I feel the same sense of urgency that I can sense from you. I relate to that. So a couple of questions in mind, and you can maybe pick and choose which one you want to focus on. You mentioned data centers and the Moore's law and all these other scale law that I wasn't familiar with, but data centers, they consume a lot of fresh water, a lot of electricity. And as far as I know, we're not prepared for that as a planet. That's one concern with this rapid advance of AI. Governance, legislations, I believe that most countries are running behind as well. And as you mentioned, I think in one of your interviews, the big AI labs are saying, please regulate us,
yeah,
because governments are not keeping up with the open letter and so on. And I'm curious, and I think we'll touch that on eventually. Do you think that we still have hope? Do we still have time still? And is what's the role of government and corporations? Because we have this race for AI, and also countries. We have major countries in the scenario trying to win the race, because of course we in the AI race we have so much power. So general thoughts around my rambling.
right. I would love to. I noticed. I I I'm going to talk a little bit about the dangers here. I also want to go to the positive sides and the potential. But I think this is very important, as you say, and it's really a scaling operation right now, the development of AI. So that is quite thankful from a regulation perspective, because it's hard to hide whether you are building massive data centers. It's hard to hide. And you can actually regulate the biggest companies who are where the chips are flowing to, like the graphic GPUs, graphical processing units. And these GPUs are coming as primarily from one company called NVIDIA. So you have quite specific chokeholds in the supply chain, you could say, where if we agreed that we want to, let's say, ensure that when there is a new model release, we can satisfy these security questions, like can you guarantee that a terrorist can't just take an open source version of this and get access to a very powerful uncensored model? Can you guarantee that this model will not do X, Y, Z? We can actually quite practically do that by saying, if you are using a training run with more than this much compute or chips, then you need to go through this regulating body. So that is very practical and very doable. The problem is, though, as you said, also the arms race dynamics, right? Because if we slow down, then this country won't slow down, right? It's this dynamic always. And there we need probably something akin to a, as we did with nuclear weapons, we need countries to come together and say, we agree that if this technology goes out of hand, it won't serve any of us. And right now it looks like that won't happen. So then you're left with what countries are capable of doing this. And the biggest countries are China and the US, right? And right now the US is far ahead. And some would say that one of the most dangerous things that can happen is if you're in a very, very tight arms race. So let's say the US is just 3 months ahead of China, right? And then there isn't this trust between the nations, that there's this fear that, oh, the US will do something dangerous and against China, vice versa. And then when you have this arms race, you won't be as aware of security constraints, right? So there's some people who argue that it's actually quite important for the US to have a bit of buffer, because then the US could enforce more restraints.
A role model.
Right, a highly complex question. And what I almost think we need to do is, when these models are developed, you have to accept, and it's a very dangerous thing to accept, but that's maybe what we need to accept, that we will create something more intelligent than us. And it is incredibly hard to control this AI, but it will happen. So what kind of values, what kind of optimization functions can you give this AI so that when we let it loose for the day, we hope and pray that these are the values that will lead to an outcome that we want. And then there's also technical, like interpretability research. There's a lot of technical research questions we can do to understand these models. But at the end of the day, I think it comes down to what values do we encode in the AI? And that's it where conflict, it the question. It is the thing we have to communicate. We have to communicate that we are not just pieces of meat. Modern science usually talks about us. What we truly care about, this is my opinion, and I stand with this opinion very strongly. What we care about is our subjective experience, our cognizing, our conscious experience. And there seems to be processes in the brain that correlate to it, but it's not the thing. And I can go into very specific reasons and arguments for this. But what we care about is what if I there is some sense of some things feel good, some feelings feel bad. We probably don't want torture. We all agree on that. Do we want?
We all want the good things, and we want to avoid the bad things in terms of experience. We don't want to suffer. We want to be happy, basically. Yes.
But what does that mean? And there's all these questions around it. And given the pace of AI development right now, and the pace of consciousness, our understanding of consciousness, the trajectory is consciousness research. That's the word I will use, and then we should probably define consciousness also. But the trajectory of consciousness research is way behind the trajectory of AI development. But what we also have to think about it, AI can be a really good aid for us to do research about what consciousness is, right? And so there is a lot of potential if we do the right things the coming years to accelerate this understanding. And then we will probably not have at all a perfect answer, but we can give the best possible clues. We can give the best possible argument to this AI of what we want, so that when it really takes off, when it can do research on itself to increase intelligence, it carries that with it, and even though we might not control it, it might grow and have an understanding of what we want to optimize for.
Yeah. So tying, this is really find this topic of consciousness and how it potentially relates to AI really fascinating. So just happy we stumble in this direction. So for me also, when we try to, as you say, encode into or teach these AI systems what is actually ethical and what's beneficial, so that they, once they become much more, even godlikely powerful than we are, that they, do the quote unquote right things. But so for me, one of the core things of ethics is actually intention. So for human, the ethical value of our actions is determined by whether we want to do good or if we want to do harm, and coupled with having the wisdom to, see clearly which is which. So, but if we have a good intention and if we have wisdom, then we'll be ethical. But for AI systems, at least as they exist today, they don't have intentions, and they don't have hopes and aspirations or values or empathy. So do you think we can develop AI systems that incorporate things as that and have skillful intentions? moving forward?
It's,
Or is that
I think,
too science fiction?
I think the word intention, first of all, is mostly used in the context of humans or animals.
Yeah. Only if it was human. Yeah.
There is some aspect of what an intention is that maybe only applies to animals and humans. But then the question is there some more kind of meta aspect of what is an intention? And some would say that it just boils down to what is the objective function of the AI. We have, if you scroll on Facebook or TikTok, what you see in the feed is ruled by an objective function determined by a bunch of factors, but the primary factors are how much time you spend on the site, really, and how that leads to ad revenue. So you could say that is the intention of these algorithms, right? And then, so if you take that view, then it's a matter of how do you encode what we really care about in computer language, right? In computer language is zeros and ones. It's like you have to talk to the most autistic person you can ever imagine. You have to use logic. You have to be a programmer, really. And if you take that point of view, then probably what we need are the best thing would be formulas in physics, I would say, like physics formulas, maybe clues of how the human anatomy relates to what we care about, like very, very objective information like that. And that can then translate the intention to the AI. But then what I also heard you entail here is something a bit deeper, because when a human or an animal has an intention, they're also experiencing the intention, right? They have a conscious experience of things. And I would argue that for us to have the best possible outcome with AI, I would want the AI to also be conscious. But it's a very dangerous landscape here, because if it's conscious, you also want it to be conscious in a very specific way that relates to being highly empathetic to kind of fundamental consciousness values that humans and animals have. And it gets a bit sci-fi here, but I would love to explore this further. This isn't talked much about, but I think it's incredibly important. And there are people like David Pearce. He's a philosopher. He talks about full spectrum intelligence. He talks about how for us to have a true knowledge, understanding of truth, there needs to be a subjective experiencer within the AI. And yeah, it opens up a whole can of worms that still are incredibly important, I think. And lastly, I think what we are talking about, it entails that, practically speaking, in the world, we need to see way, way, way accelerated research and like practical research on understanding consciousness. And right now, yes, the trajectory of the research that's being done today is way too slow, way, way, way too slow. And the mainstream culture, the mainstream understanding is way behind I would say, in understanding the full importance of this. So I think there's a lot to be done here, a lot of exciting things to be done, and the especially when you can collaborate with AI around these things, and then you come to questions around ethics, like what are the ethics of doing accelerated neutral on consciousness? What things can you do and not do? And there comes questions around study design, like research study design, because it gets very tricky when you have to deal with subjective experience. So there's this whole can of worms of things coming up. But yeah, for me, I'm very excited about these topics.
Okay. If I can sneak in with a question, I was quite excited to hear you talk about values, Oliver, when you use the word values, because while I feel that intention for me is a little bit abstract, and I totally see the value in exploring intention in AI. I feel even our tagline of the podcast is advocating for human values in AI. I believe that human values is a little bit more tangible in my limited view. So one question that I had in mind for a while that I mentioned in the Mind for AI manifesto is even in the Mind for AI manifesto website is, can we decode, as you said, what is kindness, what is humility? Those Martin Seligman from University of Pennsylvania, the godfather of positive psychology, with his research, he identified 24 universal human values, that are valued across humanity over time, blah blah blah. So, a question that I had in my mind is, can we feed machine learning models with the behaviors? So decode what is humility, what are the behaviors, and decode that. And then, as you said, feed AI, so that's in the DNA, and whichever direction AI goes, at least we know that that foundation is there. So it's aligned with the interests of humanity versus, some other agenda. So I'm curious about your view on that, the values, piece. And yeah, very exciting indeed, the idea that we could use AI to investigate consciousness, but that sounds a little bit out there for me. Exciting, but but I'm curious about your view on the values, embedding AI with our core human values, universal values.
I feel a bit provocative and playful. I'm gonna say ranch. And start with, I think even though it's out there, it it must be done. It must be done. And yeah, I think we are heading into an incredibly bizarre future. And um, there it's gonna be bizarre. So if there will be very interesting conversations and dialogues in the mainstream around these things. But coming to your question about human values, I feel like I can answer it from two perspectives. One is, if you take the current AI paradigm, the current capabilities of models, or let's say a bit smarter, and how do you encode human values in there? That's very practical. And then there's also when these AI models become more intelligent and quite autonomous, they can do things on their own. It's way more crucial that they have the right specific values that we talk about, because if you say that, love is oxytocin, let's say, in the human brain, then maybe we just get hijacked and have these electrodes planted in our brain, right? And that's not exactly what we want. There's all these ways where you get the so-called perverse incentives, which we've already seen in, for instance, the Facebook. Many years, we all know that the fact that these recommendation algorithms have biased towards, let's say, engagement, have also led to certain dynamics in elections around the world, for instance. But maybe it wasn't the outcome of Facebook that very extremist views would be exaggerated on their platforms in elections, but it happened as a second order side effect of not
And
encode the values well enough. And to be honest, I think this approach of it having a list of values won't work. I don't think it will work because it's too complex. There's all these branches of ethics that can really,
mm,
really, it's hard. It's really hard. So, and um, I think what we truly care about is consciousness also, consciousness values. And humans are conscious. So human values are embedded in consciousness values. But humans have a track record of killing billions and billions of animals in factory farming. If we exaggerate those values, and I don't think that's an outcome that we want. Uh, so I think it boils down to understanding consciousness more, because that's when we can get really specific for these AI models. And it boils down to what are positive conscious experiences and what are negative conscious experiences. And that's quite an open field. And there's a lot of interesting views in Eastern traditions that I think have interesting clues around it. And yeah, but it is sci-fi, and by standing my truth, that's the only way we can really, when we get to really capable AI models, that's how we can actually get the outcome that we want. Yeah.
I just saw I a really well, at least to me, really interesting parallel just occurred to me. So, if you look at, so like you said, there's a lot of ethical systems that humanity's come up with, and a lot of them are encoded within religious traditions. So the religions have these lists of, the 10 Commandments and the 5 precepts in Buddhism and so on and so forth. So there's these lists of do's and don'ts. And I think that those things are attempts to express in terms of behavior, things that would necessarily have to come from, if you have a really deep place within yourself where you can tap into wisdom and love and compassion, which is, again, something that you can argue whether that's within us or not, but I think there is, and I think that's what religions actually point to. But if you can tap into that place, you become naturally ethical and you don't need the list. So the list has been the attempt to encode those things for humans who haven't potentially tapped into to that level of consciousness. So it's so it just occurred to me that maybe there will be a parallel to that within development. I don't know. Am I making any sense there?
it's extremely ambitious, and I'm actually very happy to hear that you have some hope around that, Oliver, because it sounds completely off the charts. But if there is hope to tap into that wisdom via AI, that's very good news. Yes.
I'm very happy to talk about practical ways this can happen. I'm very happy to talk about that.
Wow.
I think it's very important. But I think the way I interpret what you said, Martin, is that so there. I think it's called monism in philosophy, where I would invite people to And kind of, so if you start from the perspective that um, I am conscious, I experience something, that's from a philosophical perspective, that's actually one of the um, things you can be the most sure of, actually. That I think,
Maybe the
yeah,
only.
exactly. That's something you could create, and then there is an aspect that if you believe that other people are also conscious, so either you believe that you are the only conscious person in the whole universe, or you believe that other things or other people are conscious, right? And there's a lot of branches of philosophy that lead to this conclusion of, I think it's called monism, where uh, you kind of have to conclude that there has to be a connection to I forget what I said about monism. There,
I think the word you're looking for might be solid system.
yeah, solid
potentially.
system when you're the only one conscious.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I'm getting to is, there are very logical reasons to think that your consciousness, your conscious experience is a subset, substrata of a meta consciousness. And it sounds it sounds a bit woo woo and, religious and new age when it is. But um, once again, when you get into these questions of consciousness, you just have to accept that you get into quite interesting territory, but we have to adhere to logic and truth as best as we can. And I would argue that there is an aspect of a meta consciousness. I have a separate experience. I'm not experiencing what you are experiencing right now, but on some level, if assuming you're conscious, which I think you are, then there is a unifying factor, and I think that you can arrive there logically speaking. So an AI could theoretically arrive, or should arrive there logically speaking. It's essentially a logical proof, uh, and assuming that there is, assuming that, then if you optimize for positive consciousness experience, then actually you should optimize for positive conscious experience for all conscious beings, right? So there's something there that we need to communicate optimally in very precise language. It's possible that these AIs will be so intelligent that they independently arrive there. But I think there's many reasons to believe that it can easily sidetrack into different territories. So you want as specific language and laws, physics laws, I would say, to encode this. And I'm there's this concept called the hard problem of consciousness. Philosophers and physicists, they've tried to figure out what consciousness is forever. And there's some things that are really hard to figure out about it. And what I'm saying is we don't need to get an answer to what consciousness is on a complete level in terms of science, but we can get closer approximations of what we want. We know that if we stimulate certain regions of the brain, that correlates to certain conscious experiences. So already we have approximation. So how can you get closer approximations? I think the thing you would want here.
And my question then becomes, how do you prompt ChatGPT to get us this? No, but
Okay.
uh,
Okay. So thanks for sharing, Oliver. Just listening to you, intention together with intuition and consciousness, for me,
Yeah.
I see them a part of the same kind of bucket. I cannot imagine with my limited understanding how we can mimic with AI, but your confidence, you sound so sure. So I'm actually fascinated and very open-minded and yeah, curious to yeah, watch this space.
Yeah. 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 Thank you. Yeah. It's out there. There are um, there are people who are exploring this, and I think there should be quite soon uh, be people who are creating. You could say a Manhattan Project, but Manhattan Project has many negative connotations. You could say Bell Labs. Bell Labs was this lab that came up with all this Nobel Prize winning research. There should be a Bell Labs for consciousness research and development, and and uh, and even though they might not be directly tied to, let's say, the government or even the AI labs, I think if you follow a science, if you can follow science, if you have proof, if you have things that can easily be proven, then it's very easy for government or AI labs to adopt those things and encode it in their AIs. Whilst if it's a complete mystery, for instance, how to encode these values, then we're rolling the die much more. So, yeah. And we've gone quite meta here, further in the AI development. But of course, the coming 5 years, there will be this blend of certain things these AI models can do incredibly well, and certain things it's still pretty stupid at, or the adoption in society hasn't gone there yet, right? So even though you will have an AI model that can do the work of whole departments in big companies or the governments, even, there might just be bureaucracy and stuff that ensures that the change might be much slower than we think in these areas. So where there's we were just talking about exponential acceleration of technological progress, and depending on where you are, where on that kind of exponential growth, you will talk about very different implications in how society looks and what you will talk about, I think.
Yeah, and I think to paraphrase something you said earlier, I think shit's about to get really weird, and we have no idea just how weird. That's, mm, I think that's where we're heading, and hopefully it's an exciting and amazing and optimistic future we're moving into. But as you started out saying, there are some real risks as well.
If I may go back to Martin's point before, which I totally agree that, having, the 10 commandments or the 5 precepts or whatever rules or, guiding principles we have in terms of values for humanity, they are workarounds when I cannot tap into that wisdom that is innate, that is available to, to us. So in the meantime, until we can actually mimic consciousness and tap into that wisdom via AI, I wonder, yeah, I guess you mentioned that it can be very hard. I think about the trolley, probably is not even more relevant these days, but the trolley problem, what is ethic, all these ethical dilemmas, I get it. can be very complicated to mimic that as well. And in the absence of those frameworks, those standards, in the absence of legislation, global agreement, sounds
Yeah.
like your view is that we need something like, global agreement as we have for nuclear war, climate change. So while all of that is not happening, um, I was wondering a while ago if there would be any value in, and of course that's quite ambitious and probably I don't know how feasible it is um, to have a grassroots movement where the professionals working in the AI space are a little bit more mindful and conscious themselves, because in the absence of the rules, even when we have rules, not necessarily everyone is following the rules, but in the absence of legislations and governance and, a good DNA for AI, what will be the value of bringing AI professionals along the journey, because I believe that AI can be only as ethical as well as the human behind, the humans work coding, project designing, project managing the AI solutions. Um, Given that those decisions are being made by those large corporations, I don't know what's the value you think that engaged professionals could maybe help, instead of top down approach, maybe bottom up approach. Is
Yeah.
there any value in that?
I think that's a really good point. And yeah, the people who are creating it, they're the ones
Right
creating it.
now, right
And
now they're making decisions.
yeah, and I have a lot of friends who worked at these AI labs, and and what I can say is there are a lot of people who are they're really good people. They know about the risks and so forth, and and they're doing their best. And then there are some people, like for instance, Daniel Cocotillo. He worked at OpenAI, and then he uh, did a whistleblowing campaign around someone he saw internally, and and uh, and then there's the thing is like I think a lot of the people I know, they they either are at these companies and are kind of, so for instance, there's certain AI labs that are more mindful than others, as far as I understand it. For instance, Anthropic is one of the top 3 AI labs. On the margin, they're much more kind of careful and ethical. So a lot of the more of those kinds of people who care, they go to Anthropic. And then there's uh, people who are at OpenAI who are kind of there to say that, you know, uh, it's better to be on the inside and be able to have impact from there. And then there's people who are kind of, they just see themselves as cogs in the wheel a little bit. There's some interesting ethical bypass, in my opinion. So they know about this, but somehow there's a interesting bypass of they don't think they are that important, and they get very well paid, where they are having some form of argument that it's more important. I had just a friend who got, and I'm not gonna name him, but he got a call from Sam Altman, and for the CEO of OpenAI to close him as a research scientist at OpenAI, and he said that he wants he thinks that it's most important that the US has an advantage over China, so hence
Mhm.
they should accelerate progress. Harold, yeah, there's a lot of reasonable people, but also at the end of the day, there's there are certain incentives in place. There's certain arms race dynamics, and that still leads to certain outcomes that you wouldn't want. And a lot of these people are quite freaked out that by the lack of security, for instance. And at OpenAI, there have been some whistleblowing around how they're not good. They're not indexing on cybersecurity enough at all. So, of course, you're gonna get other nations getting in, stealing intellectual property, and so forth. And yeah, I went on a bit of a ramble, but I agree. There's you would want to go bottoms up, but then there's also a question of how realistic, how quickly you. Of course, Yuval Noah Harari, he talks a lot about AI development and the inner, and as I understand it, he kind of argues that we should kind of pause everything, and then everyone should get enlightened, essentially. And then in 30 years or something, then we can keep building. But then the question is, can we pause it, and can we make people enlightened in such a time frame? Oh, all right. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm starting to think that maybe we should wrap the conversation up. I would be. Yeah, it's been really interesting. I'm thinking maybe we should do a part 2 of this, or I don't know. What do you think, Natalie? It feels like we're just scratching the surface this far, but so there's a lot to talk about. But maybe just as a way of wrapping this up, what is your own sense for this development? Are we heading to a good place or a catastrophic place? What do you say, Oliver? To close this out,
I would say I'm feeling a bit like flabbergasted, or like it's, even though theoretically I knew of these things since a young age and I had conviction in it, it's another thing for those things to turn out to be true, and it's actually happening. And there's a sense of shock in me around what is happening, and it's a bit, and that entails all kinds of human emotions that are fear, some disorientation, and I truly don't know. I think we want to do the best we can to nudge it in a positive direction, but then also there's all kinds of things that can happen on the way. So, and then at the end of the day, we'll have to pass off the reins to something way more powerful and intelligent than us. And then it's more of a, maybe we can hope that if something is more intelligent, there will be a convergence to truth, and will lead to outcomes that we want. But it's hard to say. Yeah.
So, truth will set you free. This is the cloaking hope for this this conversation, and potentially
Truth will prevail. Okay. Can I ask a very, very last one, Martin? Would that be okay?
Sure, yeah.
And maybe one could be for the part 2, Oliver. I was curious to hear your thoughts on the the importance of keeping humans in the loop, until we sort all of these. Is that keeping humans in the loop something that could help us? And your view on anthropomorphism. Stuart Russell talks about the risk of making AI human-like. So, but maybe we can unpack that in the next episode after your retreat, perhaps. So maybe a last question that I'd like to ask is around very practical recommendations for the listeners.
Yeah.
We have listeners who are working in the AI space, machine learning expert, data scientists, but we also have listeners, of course, that are, completely, illiterate about AI or not really that educated about AI. So how can they produce AI more mindfully or consume AI more mindfully? Do you have any tips or any ideas on how, just people out there can consume and produce AI a little bit more mindfully and ethically?
I think, um, first of all, if you don't know about scaling law, you you should. You should. The scaling law are the trend that leads to the current development. And it also is a marker of what we can expect in the future. So if you want to be mindful in how you use AI, then you also want to be mindful of, okay, how could this impact me and the world when this gets even more capable, that you can kind of predict for these scaling laws. And, and then I wanted, I'm going to say also that when it comes to uh, ChatGPT like models, uh, you you will be left behind if you don't know how to use them. So and you if you I think getting to learn what's the frontier now. It's the ChatGPT o1. Stay yeah, on top of what is happening. Get to learn how to use these tools, and if you are doing good work out in the world, then these tools will help you do even more good, because it will then what you're doing right now, it's really as a chat interface. So so I think the current capabilities, not like you will have this AI going into your computer and doing all kinds of stuff. There's certain capabilities today, and you should uh, get good at applying it, and then keep track of how it's developing. Can you say?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a really good place to end, I think. So thank you so much for having this conversation with us. A lot of really interesting things coming up. And yeah, watch this space. There might be a part 2 coming up, I think.
Okay.
And yeah, you're going into retreat. So have a lovely retreat, and we'll see you somewhere at the other end of that.
Send us meta. Send us some meta. Thanks, Oliver.
Thank you.
Okay.
Right.
Bye.